afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. And again, if you have a cell phone, you know the drill. Please silence it in some way so that we don't interrupt our guest. If you're not on our email list, I see a few new people. There's a box over there. Just fill out one of those forms and we'll get you weekly emails about what's coming up so that you'll know. Next week on the 19th at noon, we will have Jason Kapkawa, whose book is called Hungry Town. It's a novel, and it sounds very interesting. Don't forget about our Dinosaur Program, which starts next Thursday, the 21st at 7 p.m. If you're among the first 50 to sign up, you'll get a free t-shirt, dinosaur t-shirt, People's University, highly collectible, highly desired.
One size fits all, or they come in sizes?
They do come in sizes. You'll get something close to the size you wear if you're on the list. And you also get two very nice dinosaur reference books that our experts said were the best non-expert dinosaur books. And also, if you're among the first 20 to attend all 7 classes, you're welcome to come with us on our field trip to the Carnegie Museum, where their premier dinosaur expert will take us on a behind-the-scenes tour of all things dinosaur. So that's pretty exciting. You take a picture with our dinosaur upstairs, put it online with hashtag #ILoveOCPL. You'll be eligible to win family passes to the Carnegie Museums of Pittsburgh and a $100 gift certificate to the public market. So it's not a lot to ask for very good gifts. All right, now to introduce our guest for today, our friend, the curator, that sounds more fancy than organizer, the curator of the Wheeling Poetry Series and the Poet Laureate of West Virginia, Mark Carson.
Thanks, Sean, very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome you to Lunch with Books. Not the Wheeling Poetry Series per se today, but a great treat is in store for you. Let me just quickly say that I'm sorry that we had to cancel the June Wheeling Poetry Series, but Jeff Worley had suffered a loss in his immediate family earlier this year, and it's been a long recovery, so it wasn't something that was anybody's fault. And I invite you to stay tuned for the reading coming up in the autumn with Lynn Emanuel, certainly one of the most respected poets in America, and who was actually my colleague at the University of Pittsburgh long, long ago when I was first doing my graduate work. But today is Lunch with Books, and it is a real pleasure to introduce my friend and the immensely talented Renee Nicholson to our program today. She is the author most recently of Delicate, Essays on Dance and Illness, as well as 2 poetry collections, Postscript and Roundabout Directions to Lincoln Center. A former dancer, Renee is an American Ballet Theater National Training Curriculum Certified teacher and also holds a profession's certificate from Columbia University in Narrative Medicine. Along with her co-editors, Dinty W and Erin Murphy, she is the editor of this anthology, Bodies of Truth, Personal Narratives of Illness, Disability, and Medicine, and was the 2018 recipient of the Susan Landis Award for Distinguished Service to the Arts from the West Virginia Division of Culture and History for her work in writing with patients with cancer. It is through this latter calling that I believe I may first have come to know Renee, a work that I've truly believe will be seen as ever more essential in how all of us come to see the arts of healing. And as Renee proves in this, her newest book, Fierce and Delicate, she knows about illness and the dance on which it can lead us. Library Journal called this an elegant collection of essays from a dancer's soul that will uplift all readers, especially those who love dance. And Renee Doust writes that, quote, in Fierce and Delicate, Nicholson teaches us how to envelop our impossible dreams with gratitude for the life we have now. It is a very, very special pleasure to welcome Renee to Lunch with Books. Please give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I have a special place for libraries. My day job is the director of the Humanities Center at West Virginia University, and my office is in the Dean Suite of the Wise Library. So if you're in Morgantown, come by and say hi. I'd love to see you. If any of my library friends are coming in through the internet today, hi guys. So I'm going to read a lot about dancing today and less about illness. So sometimes just starting at the beginning is the best way to go. This is when I was a mouse. The year the sink fell in our dressing room, I was the littlest mouse. When the sink fell, water sprayed out into the long room. The sink had been attached to a wall with no pedestal or cabinet underneath for support, just an old sink with rust stains around the drain. The wall was painted gray, fluorescent light shone overhead, and mirrors lined the opposite wall. When the sink fell, no one touched it, although the backstage moms in charge of our dressing room had told us to wash our hands. Instead, we gathered our bags and costumes and marched out, me petrified that I'd be blamed for the sink because it hadn't occurred to me that the theater's backstage was old and maintenance shoddy, because I had complained out loud about the pink canvas shoes we had to wear with our costumes. I figured I was already branded a troublemaker and the fallen sink would be blamed on me. I was sure of it. I preferred leather shoes to canvas. Party scene children wore black leather slippers. Damp and cramped in the hallway, the legion of little mice was quickly divided. All the mice were small. The taller girls our age were soldiers. Many were nice. We rehearsed with them every weekend in Studio B until we moved into the theater. Unlucky me, not sent to the soldiers' dressing room. In the party girls' dressing room, the dancers kept their hair gelled around foam curlers so that on stage they had perfect ringlets. Costumes with petticoats and ribbons too. The party girls smeared crimson over their lips, their backstage mothers coating girlish lashes with mascara. Many begged for false eyelashes, like the one the company women wore. Chatter was high-pitched and pointed. The party girls did not like mice, even though most mice, like me, were also angels in Act 2. I have been in the party scene for 2 years, a red-headed party girl said. I only did battle scene my first year. Stay still, a backstage mom said, and then swiped a huge blush brush over her daughter's cheek. The girl's friend, a little blonde with a head full of pink foam curlers, nodded. She waited for her blush and then said, I'm the youngest of the party scene girls. How old? The redhead asked. 11, Curlerhead said. When I was a mouse, I thought as a mouse. I crept around the outskirts of their conversation, paid attention, looked for cheese and mischief. Last year, there was a 10-year-old girl in the party scene, the redhead said. Most 10-year-olds are still in the battle, the Curlerhead said. I smoothed my hands along the pink tights, fresh from the Capizio wrapper. My mother bought them especially for performing, no holes or runs. The party girls narrowed their eyes, heavy with mascara and eyeshadow, I didn't need makeup because I wore a mouse head. My face would be done when I morphed into an angel. Curler Head pointed a slim finger at me. How old are you? In 10 days, I'll be 8, I said. That's too young, Redhead said, her voice raising an octave so that she nearly squealed it. I had made her mad. I don't believe you, Curlerhead said. She stared down her own reflection in the big lighted mirror on the wall of the party girls' dressing room. Another mouse told her it was true. We were supposed to get a cake the night of my birthday to have after the performance. We performed until Christmas Eve, my birthday only a few days before. Many years later, in Studio 9 at American Ballet Theater, I would be told, half-jokingly, that little girls are evil. That anyone working with children should first read The Lord of the Flies. They make you wear a mouse head because you are ugly and you need to hide your face, Curler had said. She kept staring at herself in the mirror, fussing with the foam curler near her cheek. Only the prettiest girls get party scene. One of us will surely be Clara. You might never get in party scene, Redhead said, or you might have to play a boy. Sometimes girls would have to play the boy parts in the party scene because there were never enough boys for the parts. Mice and soldiers were better than even that fate. Everyone knows mice aren't good dancers, said another party girl wanting in. I looked down at my feet, covered by the wretched canvas shoes. The girls were laughing at me. You don't even get a good dressing room, Curlerhead said. Even your stupid sink doesn't like you. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I wanted to take off those canvas shoes and hurl them at the party girls. Instead, I fiddled with the elastics, trying to come up with a real good reply, one that would shut them up. My ears filled with the sound of my own blood pumping, and then I heard my name. Quick, said the director of the children. She was a dark-haired woman with slim arms and legs and a long imperial nose. We need you for a photo shoot with the company mice. I heard the chorus of party girls, the words photo and shoot being repeated slowly up and down a complaint. There were little mice like me and big mice, men from the company, and the Mouse King, also from the company. The paper wanted mice pictures. The paper wanted the littlest mouse, me. I could have stuck my tongue out at those party girls, but I didn't. Within a week, the wall was patched where the sink fell, and the mice got a dressing room again. Over the place where there used to be a sink, my friends taped a copy of the newspaper picture of me and the big mice. They wrote happy birthday and signed their names. They asked the big mice to sign, and they did. And on my birthday, the little mice and the big mice, and even some of the soldiers and third act ginger snaps sang to me. And I wished hard, and I blew out all the candles in one breath. So, the high-stakes competition starts early in the world of classical ballet. I was really fortunate. I had wonderful teachers, and my mother had put me into classes where I would have the opportunity to dance with professional dancers from a young age. And this was definitely imprinted on me as a young person. As I see some nods, some people who are dancers were dancers. This probably sounds familiar. And from about that nutcracker on, I pretty much had tunnel vision. I will be a dancer. So much so that when an English teacher told me that maybe I could also be a writer, I thought, oh my goodness, what a terrible idea. So I've prepared a couple of different things, and then I'm hoping we'll have some questions and conversation So it'll be very fun. But people often ask me what it was like dancing. And, you know, I'll reveal to you, I turned 50 at the end of this year. And sometimes it feels like a whole other life, almost like an invented character from fiction because it was so long ago. But every once in a while I get like such a clear flash of what it was like. And it's almost like a Polaroid. You take the picture and you watch it develop. And so there are these little essays that kind of get to that. And one of the things is that, you know, it is both a glamorous profession and a completely unglamorous profession. And so this little essay I chose because I think it kind of talks to both sides of that. This is called Coda Partnering. Your partner knows your body better than any of your lovers. He knows your means and hows, your hollows and crevices, how your weight is distributed through your bust and hip and thighs. He doesn't make fun of your large potato head or your sticky out ears. When you dance together, his sweat and your sweat mix, no way to tell who has perspired what. You both sweat all through rehearsals. He admires your long, strong, flexible feet and your strong, flexible back. You learn to trust that extra rotation, the flying leap that's caught in air. Most of the time, you trust your partner more than you trust yourself. The art of partnering is a lot like love, the coming together of two beings, two bodies. These bodies, yours and your partner's, are honed with technique and purpose and work. You condition it with daily class, daily rehearsals, daily regimens, your diet, your bottle upon bottle of water. Your partner takes the same classes, attends the same rehearsals, carries out his own rituals and regimens. You respect that about one another. You respect what is physical and you use it to reveal what is sublime. He will hold your waist, circle your wrists with his hands. He will cradle your body, grip your thighs. It isn't sexual, but it can be sexy. The thrill is creating something beautiful, as if beauty was something you do, not something you are. In the low light of an expiring day, you will remember this. Think of your partner more fondly than your past lovers. You will wonder where he went after you left the stage, what new and lovely creatures he supported and lifted and spun. You will not be jealous. Rather, you will wish you could have seen those performances, your body humming with past knowledge. The sun will sink. It will rise again in pink streaks across a slate of indifferent sky. So yes, glamorous, not glamorous, right? So one of the things that I thought about a lot when I was writing the second half of this book is how to be a former dancer. And I still do it sometimes. There are people in this room that could call me out for it, but I used to always say I was a former dancer, not I am a writer, which I think is always interesting. And how do you be a former dancer? It's a precarious thing, and you know, a lot of this second half of this book I write about retiring from the stage. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and that was kind of it. But something happened when I was in Morgantown that I thought maybe would resonate with the audience. I met a former dancer of some renown, actually of a lot of renown, that nobody knew was living in First Ward neighborhood in Morgantown, if any of you are familiar with Morgantown. So I would like to share this piece in that spirit. It's called A Royal in Appalachia. Though it was only noon, we cleaned the flutes and Mr. Peter Franklin White poured champagne. My student Megan, a dance minor at WVU, had finished cataloging a box of ballet artifacts to be sent to the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts, part of her independent study project in dance history. And I was the lucky instructor tasked with overseeing her work. If champagne seems like overkill for a job well done, well, you have to know Peter. A British-born dancer, Peter regaled us with a story from his company days of, quote, a minor nobleman of major means, end quote, who invited the Royal Ballet Company to his castle. Just a side note, this doesn't happen when you're a workaday dancer like I was. There were no castles. The host, a patron of the company, decided to serve every member champagne. It's what you do in a castle, the host had told Peter. And though Peter's house is no castle, it is filled with unlikely treasures. From his basement, outfitted as a makeshift wine cellar, he appeared with a bottle, a spring in his step, which at 90 years old is quite a feat. In a house on top of the hillside in the First Ward neighborhood of Morgantown, West Virginia, Megan and I toasted friendship with Peter. I also live in First Ward in a little house on a gentle slope downhill from where Peter's house looks out over the neighborhood. I had once danced too, but never with a company as lofty as the Royal. Queen Elizabeth was never, quote, my boss, and my treasures are only of personal importance. Peter lifted his flute into a ray of light cast through a small window, watched it bubble up like laughter made visible, and then he brought the flute to his lips and sipped. Megan and I followed suit, the champagne dry and ticklish in the mouth, but satisfying in that way that good drink is. I only drink champagne with friends, he said. I find this to be quite right. I watched Peter sit and sip, and despite his advanced age, I could see by his fluid gesture in raising the flute and his easy yet erect posture in the chair, those shadows of the principal character dancer he once was. Behind him, a commemorative program, a framed bit of creamy silk edged in gold tassels with the gala's offerings. Second act, Swan Lake, the whole of the Firebird. For me, Peter's treasures were the stuff of biographies and documentaries. For Peter, they all pointed to stories, as much as drinking champagne in a castle, as any royal would do. To be a former dancer is a precarious thing because I'm not really sure what to do with myself. Teach, write about dancing, become something else. These questions linger and haunt, tease and taunt, and I am left with the careful wreckage of what used to be a dancer's body. I find myself trying on different roles, not unlike learning variations from different ballets, trying to figure out which one suits me. And they all do and don't. And while I had many role models on stage, ballerinas I still too easily mythologize, I don't have many role models on how not to be on stage. Perhaps I should be looking towards my old teachers, those who performed and retired and taught me, and hundreds of other girls, the ropes of plie, tendu, dégagé. But I find that my teachers stay tucked in that part of my imagination left to memory. I find myself preserving and mythologizing them too, just as I do the ballerinas, the stars of my youth. Nostalgia, that pretty place, often rebuffs critical assessment, like the thorns and vines and leaves that surround Aurora's castle in The Sleeping Beauty. And while I'm not relegated to 100 years of sleep, waiting for a prince to kiss me, waking the slumber of dance and movement from my limbs, I still feel caught in the ballet fairy tale place, wanting to preserve that sense of magic that drew it to me when I was young. I don't know how to be in the here and now, middle-aged, sidelined by chronic disease, teaching some and writing some, and sometimes just being a wife or friend or daughter, nothing at all to do with dance or art. How does one live as an ex-dancer? I lost my hearing during the Blitz, Peter told us. Living in London during the war, Peter danced with the Sadler Wells, the predecessor of the Royal Ballet. He lived in the theater, danced despite the bombs when London refused to kowtow to Hitler's barrage. Picture an eerie December day, too warm for holidays, but with grayness that Peter called a half-night day. Assembled in the small but comfortable dining room, we were all former dancers. Peter and I were nearly the same height, and I'm 5'5", no longer the whittled girl of my dancing days, but slender enough, my long brown hair flecked with strands of gray. Still dancer hair, which could be coiled neatly into a bun. Peter's hair was full and white. We supported ourselves upright in the chairs with back muscles that had been worked as a part of a dancer's posture. Perhaps we showed leftover from a life in dance, the fluidity in which Peter gestured to a picture, his easy, graceful stride, or even the way I tilted my head, gently craning my long neck, a feature once praised by even my harshest teachers, as if I could have willed myself into producing it. That day, the stage was Peter's, though, and as dancers, we understood how rank and file works. The hierarchy particular to dance. He was principal, and I was, as I often had been, the girl in the corps. I visited Peter often, stopping in as the winter slumped into spring. On one particular visit in his kitchen, Peter instructed me to sit on a high stool-like chair as he went about preparations. Water heated to nearly boiling, a pot warmed in an ancient microwave. Peter kept his tea, Earl Grey, loose leaf, in the freezer, neatly wrapped and placed inside a Ziploc bag. He scooped a generous portion, 3 heaping tablespoons, and dropped it in the pot. He poured the water, once ready, in the teapot from an electric kettle. Then he covered it with a cozy. It must stay at least 3 minutes, Peter said. The directions are as precise as any combination or corrections in a ballet class. Dancers are creatures of peculiar habits, even with non-dance activities, even perhaps especially with tea. I had to wonder, would there be a test on how to make proper British tea? Peter's movements were slow and deliberate. To serve the tea, he used a strainer over the cup so there were no stray leaves. Opening his yellow fridge, he asked if I would care for a splash of milk. Afraid of getting it wrong, I asked if that's the way tea is supposed to be served. Peter shrugged. He said milk or sugar was personal preference. My father drinks tea with milk, I said, so that's how I'll take it. Your father has an English background, he asked, as he pulled the carton of milk from the fridge. No, I said, Scottish. His eyes lit up. That's a very important distinction. Peter's features curved into a sly smile. For a man of 90, he has finely tuned facial features, a holdover from a life on the stage where each nod, wink, and bow can mean something important. As I walked out of the kitchen with my tea, I stopped to admire a picture on the wall hung over copper pots. It's from Giselle. Margot Fontaine on the ground, the newly dead Giselle. Around her, Rudolf Nureyev as Albrecht and Peter as Hilarion. Everywhere in Peter's house, even next to the pots and pans, were snapshots of ballet history. Peter caught me considering the Giselle picture. It's a dress rehearsal, although you'd never know it by Nureyev, he said. Nureyev was a brilliant performer, and even Peter will grant him that, but never as much so as when he was dancing with Margot Fontaine. She tempered him. The magic was in the pairing. Later, when I tried making tea at home, it didn't taste as good as Peter's. It required practice and a guiding hand. When I think about Peter, I wonder if our backgrounds in dance paved the way for our unlikely friendship. Ballet, for him, lives in the story he tells, and I've recognized my own wish to live in those stories. I have a humble story, and yet when I listen to Peter, I hear humility there too. So often his stories of ballet aren't about them, but they're about her, Margot Fontaine. They called each other daughter and dad, as these were the characters they so often played on the stage. She dressed in Dior, Peter told me, pointing to pictures he has of her on tour. Margot may have been an international star, but for Peter, she lives in his stories as both a great friend and the hallmark of the classical tradition. Pulling out a gala program, he gestured to her upper body. No one will ever have lines like that, he said. So much of Peter's collected treasures are in homage to her. She is on his walls, in his library, always on his mind. He showed me a picture of the original cast of Sir Frederick Ashton's Nocturne, pointing out Margot before pointing out himself. Part of Margot Fontaine's international fame was sealed when she danced the role of Aurora in The Sleeping Beauty while on the American tour in the late 1950s. Ironically, Peter was often cast as Carabosse, the evil fairy whose spell is tempered by the benign counterspell of the Lilac Fairy, changing a death sentence into 100 years of sleep. In real life, Peter would have never been a party to such a fate. He's too alive. Now, considering Margot in the role of Aurora, I think of my own ballet students and how so few of them would recognize the names of today's leading ballerinas. They often respond with blank expressions when I mention Dame Margot Fontaine, prima ballerina assoluta. I find myself on Peter's quest, telling my own students, if you're not familiar with her, check out YouTube, even though I know the black and white clips won't do her justice. I have never danced Princess Aurora on stage, but I often feel I know her plight. I did not prick my finger and fall into 100 years of sleep, but I did have a needle pricked into my arm, which revealed a disease that would still my body from the dancing it once knew. So perhaps a kind of sleep, dance kept dormant inside me. And if a prince's kiss didn't return me to dance, at least one major event, surgery, allowed me to reawaken to the art, if not as a dancer, then at least as a teacher. My story is not Fontaine's, and I have no Peter to tell it after I am gone. But like him, I find myself yearning to make the past present, to tell those tales I have carried in sleeping muscles. There are moments, too, in our unlikely pairing when Peter and I don't talk ballet at all. Peter told me of his visits to the wound center after slipping on ice. Such a bore, he complained. I told him about my recent trip to Chicago, where I didn't make it out of any of that city's famous city's famous steakhouses. Pity, he said, but most are just overpriced. Peter enjoys Formula One racing and thinks of driving in his 1993 Honda as a craft. I like to read poems. He likes to cook. Sometimes we just get caught up in being friends, even without the dance. But ballet has its way of eventually inserting herself back into this conversation. For both of us, ballet is about what has passed, what we try desperately to preserve in words and pictures and other souvenirs. Though my house downhill isn't filled with pictures of great dancers, it does have its fair share of snapshots and old point shoes and programs, relics of days gone by. What is the drive to preserve? Is it the comfort of nostalgia whose robust arms envelop us like a hug? I've not had a lot of formal training in history, but I have to think that our desire to study history, personal, political, popular, or otherwise, stems from the need to better grasp who we are now. There is a backward-facing pull. When I am with Peter, I often find myself letting go of who I once was, happy to take the trip with him through his memories. The need to tell becomes, instead, a desire to listen, an impetus, a little like prayer. The more you listen, the more you are answered. That awful little man. As for the many pictures and books of Nureyev that Peter owns, this was the remark I'd come to expect when he talked of the great Tartar dancer. Tartar, not Russian, with the temperament to prove it. He would never properly rehearse. He would scream at the other dancers. He would scream at Margot, the greatest sin of all, according to my host. Before we could talk of Nureyev, Peter assigned me homework in the form of one of Nureyev's biographies, one that Peter determined had, quote, got it mostly right. For Peter, very few, if any, get it right, which I suppose is a dancer's mindset. We never get anything wholly right. There is always something to improve. So it is with dancing, and so it is with everything else. I can tell you I heard a faint sneer in Peter's voice when he drew my attention to the dress rehearsal picture of Giselle above the copper pots in his kitchen. Only Peter and Margot are in dress, he noted, and there's that awful little man in his sweater tights, as if dressing for a rehearsal was beneath him. I hardly witnessed joylessness from Peter except for when he talked of Nureyev. For him, Nureyev represented recklessness, equal parts talent and carelessness, especially towards others. God only knows how many he infected, Peter said, referring to AIDS, the disease that would claim the unconquerable Tartar. To say Nureyev slept around doesn't quite capture his sexual appetite. His exploits were nothing less than legendary, both according to the biography and to Peter. Peter made it clear that what bothered him about Nureyev had nothing to do with his sexual orientation. In fact, Peter had spoken with warmth and affection of other dancers who were openly gay, recalling their days together in the company as anyone would speak of their old and dear friends. He often pointed out pictures of Alexander Grant, his easy smile betraying the friendship he missed. Grant, like Peter, was a principal dancer with the Royal, one who shared many of the same roles with Peter. He told a great story about how Grant and the choreographer Frederick Ashton, Fred to Peter, had gotten lost in a borrowed car. It reminded me of antics from my own dancing days. Ballet companies have a reputation for being very stoic, full of discipline and work, and they can be. But there are days of hijinks, cut-ups, and fun. I can remember when the entire snow corps from the Nutcracker wore snowflake earrings instead of the requisite rhinestone studs, and how our choreographer simply hung his head in mock disappointment. It occurred to me, if only through my memory, that ballet breeds great friends, if occasionally a nemesis. It's just easier to focus on the nemesis. Peter was less charitable to his former artistic director, Renée K, the woman responsible for bringing Rudy Nureyev to the Royal Ballet, and therefore into Peter's sphere. She let him do whatever he wanted, he said, words spitting out of his mouth as if they were full of chalk. The dislike of Nureyev had deep twin roots. Nureyev's cold and careless ways and Peter's own deep admiration for Margot Fontaine, whose legacy he protected with the determination of a knight-errant. His chivalry included protecting her memory from all ugliness or stain. And so when talk turned to the inevitable question, did Margot and Rudy ever sleep together? Peter was resolute. A person's private life is just that, private. For me, what has been private for so long are my struggles with rheumatoid arthritis. I have no famous couple to comment on, of course, and even if I did, I suppose that RA would still be that thing I'd want to keep private. It's not out of chivalry and friendship like Peter's close mouth. Mine is less selfless. I am not as graceful as Peter. I find it hard to expose the truth. But naming the thing that haunts you helps you rid it of its power. And perhaps Peter presented me with a guide to finding my own voice. How do we know when to sing and when to be silent? I never asked, and perhaps I should have. As to Fontaine and Nureyev, no one has ever definitively confirmed what many have suspected about the onstage pair, whose palpable chemistry in front of an audience was part of their allure. I'd never asked about the affair, and if Peter tells me the truth, then I make him a promise that whatever he has told me will stay between him and me. Because, if nothing else, Peter and I have become friends, and above all, he considers me, quote, a sensible girl. At his birthday celebration, Peter makes a toast to thank his boss, Queen Elizabeth II, making sure everyone had a drink or a glass of wine. He celebrated his 90th year on Earth surrounded by his Morgantown friends. I was the only guest there who had also been a dancer. It's hard to choose how to phrase that, meaning I want to say he and I are dancers, but we are neither of us actively engaged in the art of ballet. But that's not quite right, of course, and yet it's perfectly correct. We dined on a feast Peter cooked, a traditional English beef dish and a chicken prepared in the Provençal style, which he learned, appropriately enough, while in France. The retired professor enjoyed the beef, while Peter's friend, the jeweler, asked about the wine. Peter complained about his doctor appointments, what a bore, and how slowly his wound from the winter was healing. Nothing heals as it should, he says, fast. In his company, Peter reminded me how much life he still had to live and how he wasn't letting age slow him much. It wasn't so much what he said, but the way he acted, the purposefulness in even the little things he did, like pouring tea or wine. Dance had fashioned Peter into a true gentleman, made him thoughtful and easy to be around. He has met, learned from, and worked with extraordinarily interesting and creatively gifted people. He has morphed into one of them, and it draws other people to him. At his birthday celebration, this seemed very clear to me. I couldn't help but wonder if, perhaps, one day I might become a true lady, letting the extraordinary people like Peter, like my past teachers and other dancers, influence my own character enough that I could become something better than myself. Get it right, perhaps. We are all still in the long process of learning how to be. And then there is dance, which for both Peter and me was as much a part of us as our height or eye color or skin. At its essence, I believe dancing is about joy. For us ordinary humans, joy is this huge, difficult, messy thing to handle. Dance tries to tame joy's messiness through technique and steps and the pursuit of defying gravity. But in the end, to be a dancer, you have to soak in the joy, like a bath that leaves your hands prune-like. Dancers become, in their very best moments, on and off stage, vehicles for that joy. And among his friends, this former royal radiates that same kind of joy towards all in attendance. As for me, I'm like a child stuffing my pockets full of candy, but instead it is this joy. It spills out and fades, but I keep lining those pockets in hopes that it might stay. Returning home after the festivities, a quick jaunt down a zigzag of streets, I considered where I lived. Our neighborhood was a quiet place filled with a collection of folks, university professors and pharmaceutical chemists and retired miners and organ men and fledgling writers. A place where lawns are mowed regularly and grandparents filled the swimming pool in the summer so the grandkids would visit. Where people would walk dogs, beagles and boxers and labs and miniature pinchers and Boston bulls. Flying WVs decorate lawn flags and car decals. At the top of a hill in this neighborhood lived a man who was royal as the ballet company he danced for, a man who sometimes drank champagne in the afternoon in his unassuming house, dreaming of past castles. Thank you.
Are there questions for Renee? Please. Anything you'd like to ask her?
Honey. In the back, yeah.
About what kind of responsibility is involved when you write about someone else, and how they might or might not be involved in that process.
Sure, that's a great question. So for the people online, if you didn't hear, it's a question about writing about other people and how they may or may not be involved in part of that process. And sometimes it's a sticky process because I would have loved to talk to Peter about this piece, but he passed away. So I did not have that opportunity. So I think that I had a very strong sense of legacy when I was writing this, and really trying to preserve what was a really special friendship for me. So, you know, there's that. There are people who you can't go to anymore, right? And I think it's the duty of the writer to make it very clear in the writing that you are giving your account of the story, right? And you are trying to tell your truth as best you can, right? But it is still this imperfect thing we call memory in this imperfect self that we have, right? So there's a humbleness, I think, to writing true stories. There are a lot of writers that have great advice about writing about people that you know. And some will say the story is yours, you should write it. Others will say, you know, share the stories, make sure you got things right, and all sorts of things in between. In the first piece that I wrote, I specifically did not use any names, although I did remember the names of some of those dancers. I specifically did not because we were kids, you know, and I was trying to capture that kid-like quality too. And when I was at ABT and Raymond Lucan said, "Little girls are evil," I immediately remembered that moment in the dressing room. So there was, you know, a certain truth to that. And he really did, in our training, say that we should all read The Lord of the Flies before we start teaching. So, I think that if you bring a humbleness to that project, if you're trying to capture a moment in time as truthfully as you can, and you think about how would you like to be on the other side of it. Like I got a friend who's an essayist, and I play a tiny little bit part in one of his essays. And there's nothing bad about the way he wrote about me, but I'm like, wow, I didn't see it that way, right? In fact, I didn't see it that way until I saw it published, which I was like, wow, okay. And that makes you aware of those kind of things, right? So I think, I guess, with most things, you know, treat it with the care it deserves. I mean, that's really the best advice. And, you know, I just read an interesting craft book, kind of half craft book, half memoir by Melissa Febos. And she talks about this, and she makes it an absolute practice to have the person read it and offer their advice, although she doesn't have to take it. And the ironic thing she found is that very few times does anyone ask her to change anything. So probably sage advice for somebody who's writing I admire, but also who's out there doing the thing. So great question.
Who is that author again?
Melissa Febos, and the book is called Body Work.
Body.
Yeah.
May I ask one question? I can't imagine
any of us would not want to read all of Fierce and Delicate. Can you say just a word about this collection of essays, Bodies of Truth?
Yes.
It's such an important book, I think, for us to have here in American culture at this point in time, right?
I would love to start. So Bodies of Truth is a labor of love. I had the opportunity and truly the privilege to sit with patients with cancer at WVU's Cancer Institute. I went every Wednesday for 2 years. I was funded by grants from the West Virginia CTSI and the Benetton Foundation. So this was now my job. And I sat with patients getting chemotherapy and I took their stories. And any story, like some of them talked about their cancer journey. Some of them talked about their childhood and many talked about their jobs. And I love these stories and they were so beautiful. And they were all protected by the Institutional Review Board. So the only way you can see them is if you know one of those patients and they share them with you, which I think in a way is the right way. You know, they're their stories. They should get to decide who reads them. But I realized that there was a great need to talk about the stories inside of medicine. So in 2011, way before I did this project, I was the emerging writer in residence at Penn State Altoona. And I made a great friendship with the poet Erin Murphy. And if you ever get to meet Erin Murphy, she has the most amazing hair. It's beautiful blonde and perfect ringlets and like down to the middle of her thighs. It's just incredible. You will never forget her for this hair and the gorgeous poems. Erin and I became friends and we've stayed in touch through the years. And she had been working with some doctors in Altoona. She's like, yeah, I know you're doing this stuff. And I've talked to Dinty Moore, who was a colleague of hers and a great essayist. The New York Times called Dinty Mr. Essay Man, which I think is great. And she's like, well, we know a lot of people who can share their stories of illness, but we can't get in to talk to like doctors and nurses and things like that. And you do this, do you want to join? I was like, yes, I join, right? And I thought about all those patients whose stories, you know, I couldn't share. And one of the things that we really tried to do with this collection is make it useful to pre-medical students, med students, residents, fellows, and doctors by having shorter pieces that they can read. You know, if you're on shift for 12 hours, reading a novel might be a little aggressive. Reading a 3-page story is something you could do. And so we started collecting these. And what we got when we started collecting was mind-blowing. The stories are just really beautiful. They're poignant. Some of them are quite hard. Some of them, there's one that's really funny. Dr. Tyson Bell, who is now, like, he was out there on the forefront of COVID. The New York Times was always quoting him. But he has this very funny essay about being annoyed. He just performed some procedure. He was like fist bumping people. And then the pharmacist calls him because he gotten something wrong with the medicine. And like, he's at this moment where he's like, oh, ruining my buzzkill, but then realizes how important it is to have colleagues like that and how important the exchange is. Very, in a book that isn't always very funny, it was like a moment of very funny. And so you get to see kind of a 360 view. You hear from caregivers, you hear from patients, you hear from parents, you hear from doctors. There's a beautiful story by my colleague, Dr. Matthew Smith, who's a neurologist, who just tells this beautiful story about being a resident and a letter he got from an aphasia patient. That aphasia is when you can't really pick the right word for what you want to say. The object is round, it's red. You in your brain think apple, but what comes out is orange, right? That kind of thing. And this letter that he had saved since his residency and had been thinking about and finally wrote about. So just this incredible group of stories. And the hope is that people that are going through illness have a place to look for, you know, that sort of shared compassion empathy, that it builds those characteristics in healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, OTs, PTs, CNAs, everyone, that folks that are caregivers have a place to go. And that for me, as someone who, every once in a while teaches a class called Medicine and the Arts, I have a ready-made textbook for all my students. So that's really, I really appreciate that, Mark, because that's a book that it was just a labor of love, and it was so cool to read all those stories and connect with all those writers. Just a really special project.
University of Nebraska, right? And you can
Correct.
find it online. So I don't think you have that one with you.
I don't, yeah.
Any last questions? Renee does have a Fierce and Delicate here for sale, as well as her one small book of poems. So I invite you to come up, and I'm sure she'd be happy to autograph them for you.
Also bookmarks, which are 100% free.
Oh, there you are.
Everybody should have a good bookmark. Well, thank you so much for having me today.
Thanks so much.